It was an ordinary afternoon when everything changed. One moment, I was sitting quietly in my living room. The next, a slap to my face, the sound echoing through the room. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my home, stood before me demanding the one thing that no one should ever have to give up: the keys to my house. It was an ordinary afternoon. Or so I thought. The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting a warm glow through the windows of the house I had spent years building. I had just finished a quiet lunch, enjoying the solitude of the late afternoon, when the peaceful atmosphere of my home was shattered in an instant. A slap. A sudden, sharp slap that rang through the air. And in that moment, my entire world turned upside down. I blinked, trying to process what had just happened. The sting of her hand still burned on my face, but the emotional shock hit harder. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my life with open arms, stood before me, eyes filled with anger, her body rigid with tension. I had known her since she and my son first met, watched as they fell in love, got married, and built a life together. I had always tried to be the best mother-in-law, supportive, understanding, and patient. I gave them space when they needed it and offered help when they asked for it. I had never imagined that this woman, the one I had helped bring into our family, would ever raise her hand to me in violence. My heart raced as I stared at her, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I had seen tension between us in the past, the occasional snide comment, the subtle jabs, the times when she would subtly undermine me in front of my son or the rest of the family. But never in my wildest dreams did I expect something like this. A slap that felt not just physical but deeply emotional, as though every ounce of respect and care I had given her had been thrown back in my face. Before I could even open my mouth, she spoke, her voice sharp, demanding, "Give me the keys to the house." The words were not a request. They were an order. The audacity. How could she demand such a thing from me? Her mother-in-law. The house that I had built, the house that had been a home for my family, was suddenly no longer mine to control. And why? What had happened to our relationship? How had it come to this? For a moment, I stood there, stunned, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what was unfolding before me. I had been through many challenges in my life, personal struggles, family losses, financial hardships, but nothing could have prepared me for this. This was not just a power struggle or a disagreement. This felt like a betrayal, a deep, unforgivable act of disrespect. My thoughts raced as I tried to gather myself. What had caused this sudden outburst? We had never been best friends, but I always tried to maintain a level of understanding with her. I had respected her space, never overstepping my bounds. I had offered advice when asked, but I had never been intrusive. I had always believed that as a family, we could work through our differences, that mutual respect would guide us. Yet, here she was, slapping me across the face and demanding something that should have never been up for debate. I looked at her, trying to understand the root of her anger. Was it something I had done? Had I said something that offended her? The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. I wanted to speak, to ask her why she was doing this, but the words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say in response to such an assault? "Give me the keys," she repeated, her voice tinged with impatience, as though this was the only thing that mattered, as though my years of hard work, my sacrifices, and the very foundation of this home meant nothing. The house that had seen the birth of my children, the laughter of family gatherings, the warmth of holidays, and the quiet peace of daily life. It had been my sanctuary, the place where I had poured my heart and soul into creating a home for my family. And now, she was demanding that I give it all up. I wanted to shout at her, to demand an explanation, but I knew I couldn't. Not like this. Not when my emotions were so raw, and the shock was still settling in. I had spent my life being the one who held everything together. The mother, the wife, the rock of the family. But in this moment, I felt like I was losing control. like I was being stripped of my dignity and my identity. Her eyes locked onto mine, waiting for me to comply. But I couldn't. I couldn't just hand over the keys to my home, my sanctuary, without understanding why she was asking for them in the first place. What had I done to deserve this? How had we come to this point in our relationship? I tried to speak, but my voice faltered. Why are you doing this? The words were barely a whisper, as if I didn't truly believe I was even asking them. Was this a test of my patience? Was she trying to see how far she could push me? Or was there something deeper? Something I had missed along the way? The silence between us stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. She didn't answer me right away. Instead, she stood there, staring at me with a mixture of frustration and impatience. Her face was tight, her jaw clenched, as if she had already made up her mind about what was going to happen. There was no room for negotiation, no room for discussion. The keys were hers, and that was that. It wasn't just the slap, the physical act of aggression that rattled me. It was the sense of finality in her demand, the implication that she had the power to take what was mine without question, without remorse. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just facing a personal betrayal from her, but from the entire situation. I had trusted her, believed that we were family, and yet, here I was, standing in front of her, feeling completely powerless and vulnerable. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just about the keys. It wasn't just about the house. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. It was about everything I had given to this family, and everything I had believed it stood for. And now, I felt like all of that was being ripped away from me in a single moment of anger and entitlement. As I stood there, the silence between us grew more unbearable. I had to make a decision. I had to find my voice again, to reclaim my dignity and my place in this family. This was no longer just about a slap or the keys. It was about who I was in this family and how I would allow myself to be treated. The challenge before me wasn't just to regain control of my home, but to reclaim my sense of self. But for now, I had to figure out what to say next. The journey to regain my power had just begun, but it was a path I had never imagined walking. The tension between us had been building for months, though neither of us had been willing to admit it. It was the kind of quiet unease that you could feel in the air, thick and palpable, yet neither of us had dared to speak about it. At first, I thought it was just a passing phase, something minor that we could both overlook. But as time went on, the signs became harder to ignore. Little things that once felt insignificant started to weigh heavily on my heart, and the distance between us seemed to grow, slowly but steadily. It all began subtly. A shift in how she would interact with me, a slight change in tone or a word here and there that didn't sit right. I brushed it off at first, thinking I was simply being overly sensitive. After all, no one ever warned me that being a mother-in-law would be a walk in the park. It was expected that there would be differences, some challenges in adjusting to new family dynamics, but I had hoped for something more, for mutual respect, understanding, and most of all, for a harmonious relationship built on kindness and shared experiences. In the beginning, she had seemed so eager to fit in, to be a part of the family. She would laugh at my jokes, ask for advice when it came to cooking or household matters, and even show appreciation for the little things I did. I welcomed her into our home with open arms, believing that our family would be stronger for it. I tried my best to be patient and understanding, knowing that marriage and family life could be overwhelming for a new bride. But as time passed, I noticed the warmth slowly starting to fade from her demeanor. Her smile seemed less genuine, and her laughter more forced. It was as if she was distancing herself from me, pulling away in a way that I couldn't quite grasp. At first, it was just a small thing. The way she would avoid eye contact when I spoke to her. The way she would change the subject when I brought up family matters. Then, it became more noticeable. She began to ignore my presence, even when we were in the same room. If I offered to help her with something, she would dismiss me with a cold smile or a curt response. It wasn't that she was openly rude or disrespectful, but there was a clear sense of distance, a coldness that I couldn't explain. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase, that she was going through her own struggles, maybe feeling overwhelmed by the responsibilities of married life. After all, I remembered what it was like to be a newlywed, the pressures of blending two lives together. But as weeks turned into months, it became harder to convince myself that this was just a temporary situation. The tension was too real, too heavy to ignore. It was like a storm brewing on the horizon, and though I didn't know when it would hit, I could feel the winds picking up. But I wasn't the only one who felt it. My son, too, seemed to notice the subtle shift. He would ask me how things were going with her, but there was always a hesitation in his voice, a reluctance to acknowledge the growing discomfort in our home. I didn't want to burden him with my concerns, not when I knew how important it was for him to have a peaceful relationship with his wife. So, I kept my thoughts to myself, burying them deep inside, hoping that time would smooth things over. But things didn't improve. They only seemed to get worse. I began to question myself. Had I done something wrong? Had I said something that offended her without realizing it? I racked my brain, searching for the source of the problem, but nothing came to mind. I had always tried to be considerate, to give her space when she needed it, to respect her boundaries. Yet, the more I tried to make sense of the situation, the more confused and frustrated I became. The turning point came one evening when I was sitting alone in the living room, flipping through a photo album. My mind was wandering, lost in the memories of happier times, family gatherings, holidays, moments shared with my children as they grew up. Suddenly, I heard her voice, sharp and direct, breaking the silence. She asked for something so simple, so innocent, just a favor, a small request. But it was the way she said it that caught me off guard. There was an edge to her voice, a tone of authority that I had never heard before. I looked up at her, surprised. "Of course," I said, my voice soft and willing. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me. It wasn't just the request. It was the way she had demanded it, as though she expected me to drop everything and comply without question. It wasn't the first time this had happened. She had begun to take on a more commanding role in the house, asserting her opinions without consideration for anyone else. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself that perhaps I was overthinking things. But I wasn't. It was becoming increasingly clear that the dynamic between us was changing, and not for the better. Over the following weeks, I noticed more signs of this growing tension. She started to exclude me from family decisions. Conversations I had once been a part of now felt distant and impersonal. She would make plans with my son without informing me, acting as if I had no say in the matter. The more she took control, the more I felt myself retreating into the background, a silent observer in my own home. I had always been an active participant in family life, but now it seemed as though I was being slowly pushed aside. I couldn't bring myself to confront her about it. Every time I considered talking to her, the words felt stuck in my throat. I didn't want to cause a rift, didn't want to be the source of tension between her and my son. So, I kept my feelings bottled up, hoping that if I waited long enough, things would improve on their own. But they didn't. If anything, they worsened. There were days when I found myself questioning my place in this family. What was my role now? Was I just a guest in my own home? It felt as though my entire identity was slipping away, that I was losing the family I had worked so hard to build. The house that had once been a place of comfort and love now felt cold, sterile, and impersonal. The silence between us had become deafening, a constant reminder of the growing divide. But perhaps the most painful part of all was that I could no longer tell if the tension was coming from her or from me. Was I projecting my own fears and insecurities onto the situation? Or was there truly something more sinister at play? I didn't know. What I did know was that I could no longer ignore the silent war that was brewing between us. Every small gesture, Every word, every glance now carried weight, an unspoken message of distrust, frustration, and alienation. And in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder, was this just the beginning? Would things continue to deteriorate? Or would we find a way to mend the cracks that had formed in our relationship? The silent tension had already taken root, and I knew that sooner or later, it would erupt. But what form would that eruption take? I didn't know yet, but I could feel it coming. The storm was inevitable. The slap was shocking, but what followed was even more so. As my hand still throbbed from the impact, I tried to collect myself, my mind racing. I had spent so many years building this family, nurturing these relationships, and now, here I was, standing in front of the very person I had once welcomed into our home, being told to give up what was mine, my place, my home. The slap had been the catalyst, but the betrayal that I felt in that moment ran deeper than the sting on my cheek. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the culmination of everything that had slowly eroded between us. It was the realization that everything I thought I knew about her, about our family, had been an illusion. The woman I had opened my door to, the woman I had treated like a daughter, had now become someone I no longer recognized. I stood there frozen, struggling to come to terms with the reality of the situation. It felt like a nightmare, an overwhelming, suffocating nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. She wasn't just demanding the keys to my house. She was demanding control, stripping me of my autonomy, my place in the family that I had worked so hard to build. The betrayal was not only personal but profound, shaking me to the core. It was as if she had taken everything from me in one swift motion, and I didn't know how to get it back. In the days that followed, I replayed that moment over and over again in my mind. How had we gotten here? How had this woman, who once seemed so kind, so eager to be a part of our family, turned into someone capable of such cruelty? I couldn't help but wonder what had happened behind closed doors. Had my son been part of this? Had he known what was coming? The questions swirled in my head, each one feeding the anger and confusion that had already taken root. But more than anything, I found myself consumed by one thought. Why? Why had she done this? Why had she turned against me in such a dramatic, violent way? What had I done to deserve this betrayal? Had I somehow failed her? Had I overstepped my boundaries as a mother-in-law? I had always tried to be the understanding one, the one who didn't get involved too much, who respected their space as a couple. I had never tried to take over their lives, never imposed my will. And yet, there I stood, with no explanation, no reasoning, just a cold, heartless demand that shattered everything I had known. The woman who had once thanked me for all I had done for her was now a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. She saw me as a threat, and that was the most painful part, realizing that I had become a threat in her eyes. What stung even more was the way she had dehumanized me, turning me into an object, something that could be discarded, something that could be replaced. To her, it didn't matter that I was her mother-in-law. It didn't matter that I had spent my life giving and sacrificing for this family. The years of love and care I had given seemed irrelevant in that moment. All that mattered was her own desires, her own ambitions, and whatever power she believed she could gain by tearing me down. It was hard not to take it personally. How could I not? This was my home, my sanctuary, my place of peace. I had worked hard to build a life here, to create a home that was filled with memories, laughter, and warmth. And now, just like that, she was demanding that I hand over the keys to the life I had built. It was as if my entire existence had been reduced to nothing. There was also the shame. I felt humiliated, like I had been publicly stripped of my dignity. The slap, the demand for the keys, all of it felt like an attack on everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. It was as if all of my efforts, all of the love I had poured into this family, had been erased in a single, violent moment. My mind raced. and I found myself questioning my worth. Had I been so blind to the truth? Had I failed to see the signs? But even more than that, I began to question her. How could she be so callous? How could she, after all we had been through together, treat me like this? I had spent years accepting her as part of the family, bending over backwards to make her feel welcome, to make her feel like she belonged. And yet, this is how she repaid me, by stripping me of my dignity and my place in the home I had created. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of family. A betrayal of everything that had once brought us together. I couldn't understand how she had come to see me as the enemy. What had changed? Was it my son? Was it their marriage? Had there been whispers? Secrets shared behind my back? Things I had never been privy to? Or had this been her plan all along? To slowly chip away at the family, until she had the power she so desperately craved. In the midst of my confusion and hurt, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. It wasn't just about the keys or the house. It was about everything I had believed in. Everything I had worked so hard to build. The family I had cherished. The relationships I had nurtured. The love I had given. All of it now seemed meaningless. She had taken all of that from me. And with it, she had taken my sense of self. My place in the world. And what made it worse was that I couldn't talk to anyone about it. I couldn't even bring myself to tell my son what had happened. Not yet. I didn't know how to explain it to him, how to share the deep hurt and betrayal I was feeling without breaking everything apart. He loved her, and I didn't want to be the one to tear their marriage apart. But the pain I felt was real, and it was growing by the minute. I had always believed in the strength of family, in the bonds that tied us together. But now I wasn't so sure. How could I trust anyone? Least of all the person who had been closest to me. The person I had tried to protect and care for. The betrayal was not just an emotional wound. It was a gaping, festering wound that I didn't know how to heal. It was as though everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, had been torn away in one cruel moment. And as I stood there, trying to comprehend the enormity of what had just happened, I realized something that hit me harder than any slap ever could. I was no longer safe in my own family. My place in this family had been stolen from me, and I wasn't sure how to get it back. The moment she slapped me, time seemed to slow down. For a second, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The shock of the assault numbed me, leaving me in a frozen state, trying to process what had just happened. My cheek stung. But the pain wasn't just physical. It was deeper. It was a pain that cut through me, straight to my core. But the emotional torment that followed was far worse than the initial slap. It was a whirlwind of confusion, anger, disbelief, and heartbreak, all tumbling over one another in a chaotic, uncontrollable spiral. In the days that followed, I found myself questioning everything. I had always prided myself on being someone who could handle conflict, someone who could face adversity head-on, without letting emotions cloud my judgment. But this was different. This was a betrayal that shattered me in a way that I had never experienced before. It was as if the foundation of everything I knew about my family, everything I had worked for, was suddenly cracked wide open, exposing a painful truth I had been too blind to see. Anger was the first emotion that surfaced. It bubbled up inside me, hot and unrelenting. How dare she do this to me? How could she slap me, demand the keys to my house, and treat me with such disrespect? I had done nothing but love her, welcome her into my family, and try to be there for her when she needed me. And this was how she repaid me. My anger was raw, fierce, and uncontrollable. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to make her understand the depth of the pain she had caused me. But each time I opened my mouth, I found myself choked by the overwhelming weight of the emotions crashing over me. But the anger was quickly replaced by confusion. I tried to make sense of it, tried to understand what had brought us to this point. Was this just a one-time outburst? Or had it been building for months? For years? What had I missed? I had always prided myself on being attentive, or knowing my family well enough to sense when something was wrong. But this felt like a bolt from the blue. There had been tension between us. Yes, but nothing that would have suggested this level of hostility. I couldn't understand how the woman I had welcomed into my life with open arms could suddenly turn on me in such a brutal way. Was it me? Had I done something to provoke her? Was I so blind to the signs that I didn't see this coming? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last, as the anger and confusion collided inside me. I was hit by a wave of sadness. It wasn't just the slap that hurt. It was the loss of trust, the loss of connection. The woman who had once been a daughter to me, who had shared meals, laughter, and intimate moments with me, was now someone who had violated the very core of our relationship. How had we gotten here? How had I allowed myself to become so blind to the distance that had been growing between us? The sadness wasn't just about losing her respect. It was about losing the family dynamic I had worked so hard to build. It was about realizing that the ties that had once bound us together were now frayed, broken, and perhaps irreparable. But then came the guilt. The overwhelming, suffocating guilt. Could I have done something differently? Could I have seen the signs? Been more proactive in understanding her feelings? In trying to bridge the gap that had formed between us? The guilt gnawed at me, like a constant presence that I couldn't shake off. I had always tried to be a good mother-in-law, to be supportive without being overbearing, to offer guidance when it was asked for. Had I failed her? Had I failed my family? Could this entire situation have been avoided if I had just been more aware, more tuned in to the undercurrents of tension that had been building for so long? As these emotions churned inside me, I found myself falling into a kind of paralysis. It wasn't just the pain of what had happened that held me back. It was the sheer emotional exhaustion of trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't move forward. Couldn't make a decision about what to do next. Because every possible course of action seemed to lead to more hurt, more disappointment, more conflict. My emotions were all over the place, pulling me in different directions, leaving me feeling utterly lost and unable to find my footing. But perhaps the most painful part of it all was the realization that I had lost my sense of self. In the face of this betrayal, I felt small, insignificant, and powerless. The woman who had been strong, confident, and capable, the woman who had stood as the backbone of her family, was now reduced to a shell of herself, struggling to find her place in a world that had suddenly felt alien. I had spent so many years defining myself by my role within my family, by the relationships I had built. And now, in the wake of this betrayal, I was left questioning who I was and what I meant to anyone. Was I just an accessory to their lives? Someone who could be discarded when no longer needed? Or had I truly been a source of love and support all these years? The emotional roller coaster I was on had no clear destination, no end in sight, and that uncertainty weighed heavily on me. But amidst all the emotional turmoil, something began to shift inside me. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. But over time, I started to realize that I couldn't allow this betrayal to define me. Yes, the pain was real. Yes, the confusion was overwhelming. And yes, the guilt threatened to consume me. But I had to remember who I was before all of this. Before the slap, before the betrayal, before the uncertainty. I was more than just a victim in this story. I was a woman who had lived through challenges, who had overcome hardships, and who had built a life based on love, resilience, and strength. As the days passed and the emotional roller coaster began to calm, I found the strength to reflect on what had happened and what it meant for my future. I realized that, despite the betrayal, I still had the power to decide how I would move forward. I could let this moment break me, or I could use it as an opportunity to reclaim my sense of self, to rebuild my life in a way that honored my worth and my values. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but I knew that the first step was accepting the pain, embracing the emotions, and refusing to let them control me. In the end, the emotional roller coaster that I had been on had taught me something invaluable. I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. The pain, the confusion, the guilt, and the heartbreak would never go away completely. But they didn't have to define me. I could move forward. And I could rebuild. I would find peace again. Not because the past would be erased, but because I would learn how to live with it. How to make it a part of my story, rather than letting it consume me. It wasn't until after the slap, after the betrayal, after the overwhelming emotional roller coaster, that I finally came to a realization. All the confusion, sadness, and hurt that I had been carrying, the weight of all that pain, had led me to this moment, this decision. I could no longer be a passive observer in my own life. I could no longer let the people I loved, the people I had nurtured and cared for, dictate my existence and my self-worth. I had allowed this to happen for far too long. I had allowed my daughter-in-law to take control of a situation that was mine to manage, mine to protect. But that was the past. Now, it was time for me to take back what was rightfully mine. My dignity, my space, my life. The path to reclaiming my place in my own home and in my family wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be some grand, dramatic gesture of defiance or rebellion. No. It was going to be far more difficult and far more profound. It was going to require me to dig deep into myself and pull out the strength I hadn't even realized I still had. It was going to require me to confront my own fears. Fears of losing my family. Fears of being alone. Fears of being rejected and cast aside. But it also meant standing up for myself in a way I never had before. It meant setting boundaries and making it clear that I would not be disrespected any longer. It was in those quiet, lonely moments of reflection that I understood something important. I had been so focused on making everyone else happy, on keeping the peace, on being the perfect mother-in-law, that I had neglected myself. I had ignored my own needs, my own desires, and my own rights as a human being. I had bent over backward for the sake of others, often to my own detriment. But I could no longer do that. I had to put myself first, not in a selfish way, but in a way that honored my worth and my place in this family. The first step in taking a stand was acknowledging my own worth. I had spent so long measuring my value through the eyes of others, through my son, through my daughter-in-law, through the people around me. But I had forgotten to look in the mirror and see my own reflection, my own strength. I was not just a mother-in-law, not just a caretaker, not just someone who had been placed in a role for others. Convenience. I was a woman with a rich history, a woman who had built a life filled with love, sacrifice, and hard-earned achievements. I had a voice, and it mattered. I had the right to speak my truth, to defend my space, and to be treated with respect. And I was no longer going to stand by quietly while that right was taken away. But the next challenge was finding that voice. For so long, I had allowed others to dictate the terms of my interactions with them. I had been passive, unwilling to speak up when things didn't sit right with me. I had been so focused on maintaining harmony that I had allowed myself to be trampled on. But now, I was facing a pivotal moment. I could either continue to let my family walk all over me, or I could stand up for myself and demand the respect I deserved. The act of taking a stand was not one of anger, although there was certainly a deep well of anger within me. It was not about seeking revenge or trying to make anyone feel bad. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my power, and my sense of self. It was about making it clear that I would no longer be a doormat, no longer a silent participant in my own life. I had spent so many years building a family, nurturing those relationships, and creating a life for my children. But now it was time to turn that same love and care inward, to protect my own heart and soul from further harm. The first conversation I had with my daughter-in-law after the slap was the hardest. My hands trembled, and my heart raced. I didn't know how she would react. Didn't know if she would even listen to me. But I knew I couldn't let fear keep me silent. I had to speak. I had to make her understand that what she had done was wrong, that her actions had consequences. I started by simply telling her how I felt. Not with blame, not with accusations, but with honesty. I told her that the slap had hurt me, but it was more than the physical pain. It was the emotional betrayal, the complete disregard for the relationship we had once shared. That cut the deepest. I told her that I had always been there for her, that I had never once intended to hurt her, but that I could no longer tolerate being disrespected. It wasn't easy. I could see the resistance in her eyes, the defensiveness that flared up as soon as I began to speak. But I didn't back down. I didn't let her dismiss my feelings or try to minimize the situation. I stood firm, even though every part of me wanted to shrink away, wanted to take it back and apologize just to make things easier. But I knew that if I did that, I would be betraying myself once again. This was not the time for weakness. This was the time to reclaim my power. Surprisingly, the conversation didn't go as badly as I feared. While she didn't immediately apologize or express remorse, there was a shift in her demeanor. She listened. For the first time in a long while, she actually listened to me. And that in itself was a victory. I wasn't sure if it was enough to repair the damage, but it was a step in the right direction. It showed me that I was capable of standing up for myself, capable of asserting my boundaries without being afraid of the fallout. But it wasn't just my daughter-in-law I had to stand up to. It was also myself. I had to stop the internal dialogue that told me I wasn't worthy of respect, that I wasn't strong enough to stand my ground, that I should just let things slide for the sake of peace. I had spent so many years prioritizing others over myself, putting everyone else's needs before my own, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. But in that moment, as I spoke to my daughter-in-law, I realized that I was worthy of the same love, respect, and consideration that I had always given to others. Taking a stand was not just about confronting her. It was about confronting the parts of myself that had allowed this to happen in the first place. It was about recognizing the patterns I had fallen into and choosing to break them. It was about refusing to let anyone, not even my own family, define me or my worth. I had the power to change the narrative. I had the power to reclaim my space. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But each day, I grew a little stronger, a little more confident in my own voice. I knew that taking a stand wasn't a one-time thing. It was a process, an ongoing journey that would require me to continuously fight for my right to be seen, heard, and respected. But I was no longer afraid of that fight. I was no longer afraid of standing up for myself. And slowly, bit by bit, the dynamics in my home began to shift. The tension, while still present, began to ease. The walls that had grown between us started to show cracks. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly in control of my life again. I had taken a stand. And that was the first step toward healing, toward rebuilding the relationships that had been fractured by betrayal and disrespect. In the end, I realized that taking a stand wasn't just about reclaiming control over my home or my family. It was about reclaiming control over my own life. It was about learning that I had the power to define my worth, to demand the respect I deserved, and to refuse to let anyone, no matter who they were, diminish that. It was about finally finding my voice and using it, not just for others, but for myself. And that, in itself, was the greatest victory of all. If you found this story relatable or thought-provoking, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, join the community for more content like this, and stay tuned for more personal stories, insights, and lessons that could change the way you see the world. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.